Hi, I'm Subi Mike. Today we're going to pull the engine out of a 2009 Forester XT. It's a 2.5 turbocharged engine, and we're going to pull the engine out and we're going to rebuild it. This engine has been run low on oil, and it has a very serious rod knock. It's got a spun bearing. It's going to require a complete overhaul. So today we're just going to get the engine out of it, and then we're going to start. I'll start an engine rebuild on it, and probably in a week or so we'll get it ready and put it back in. But so I'm going to gather up the tools I need, and we're going to get a start on this. Here we go! Just kidding. So this is a 09 Forester XT Turbo. I haven't done one of these before. This has an air pump on it. It's a little bit more complicated than a regular turbo extraction. So we'll get her done, but it's going to be a little bit. It's going to be a little bit learning curve, a little bit of a learning curve here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull the engine cover off the top of it. So find the right extraction tool for that. Screwdriver. Just going to pop the clips out. There's 4 clips that hold this in. There's only 3 on this one. One of them's already MIA. Throw them in the box. Take this and the next thing we're going to remove is the air intake. It sits on top of the radiator support. The screws for this one are already broken. The screwing fasteners are already broken. So we're just going to lift it out and throw it in the back of the car. The little plastic fasteners don't have a very good life expectancy in Phoenix, Arizona. It's just too hot. Plastic doesn't hold up well here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull the air box off next. Disconnect the mass airflow sensor. Unplug or unhook the air box. Remove it from the air intake on the engine. So it's just loosening up a clamp. Try and release it. Okay, so this rubber stuff is pretty hard. On this particular car, they have a power steering hose that goes through the bracket on the air box, and when I put this together, I'm going to cut this right off with a hacksaw. Get rid of this bracket. Pain in the ass. There's no reason for it. It's just really hard to put in and out. It's hard to service your air. It's hard to service your air cleaner with that little bracket that. So I remove it, get rid of it. There's 2 bolts that hold this air box onto the fender well. And they're both 10 millimeter. So this one's right on the side next to the valve cover. That's the air cleaner bolt. We're going to take this nut off. We're going to take the nut off right here. It comes through the air cleaner box. You can try and take this nut off on this side, but it's easier to take it off from this angle. Just a nut inside there. This whole thing pulls right out of the fender. I'm going to take the battery out next. battery hold down is missing, so when we put it back in, I'll have to get a good used one out and put it in there. It's always nice to have a battery hold down in there. The turbo cars have a lot more stuff underneath the hood. There's a lot of stuff to disconnect on these cars. There really isn't any particular sequence you need to go in. You just gotta, just gotta remove it all. Gotta take everything off. We're gonna unbolt the intercooler. There's 2 bolts that hold it onto the turbocharger right here. Bolts look like that. If somebody hasn't switched them out. Then there's one on the bracket. There's a bracket, a support bracket on the back side. That should be the same bolt that I just took off over there. And then I take these 2 off the support bracket also. Throw them in the box. And then I'm going to lift this support bracket out of the way. This holds the intercooler in place. It's just a bracket that bolts the intake to the intercooler. So we have the bolts off. Now we're going to remove. We have the bolts off. Now we're going to remove all the hoses. There's really only 3 hoses. There's the vacuum hose that comes off the intake. Then we have there's a large clamp where the intercooler attaches to the throttle body. So we're going to loosen that clamp up good. And then there's a pinch clamp where the blow-off valve attaches. These are kind of a bugger. It's a catch clamp, but trying to get it to catch sometimes is a pain. We got it to catch. Now we're going to pry that hose off of there gently so we don't tear it. Okay, so now the intercooler is ready to come off. Oh, and it pulled right off the throttle body. Obviously there's a problem with this sleeve that's on here. It'll have to be replaced when I put it back together. This should not have pulled off the throttle body. It should have been tight. There was probably a boost leak there. Well, I guarantee you there would have been a boost leak there. So we have the intercooler off now. Now it's just a matter of stripping the top of the engine. So we're just going to unbolt everything that's on top of here. I'm gonna take off the reservoir for the radiator, for the coolant reservoir. On these, there's a little clip right here. You just push in with a screwdriver. Can you see that right there? There's a little. You just push on it with a screwdriver, and then this'll push forward to release. There's a little push, like a little lever on this bracket. So you just push on it, you pull it forward, pull it backwards actually, because that's the back of the car, and then you just lift this up. Just disconnect it from the water, from the coolant line right here. And actually, because there's an air pump on this engine right here, it's really hard to work around it. The air pump really gets in the way. I remove them and have the car tuned if I can. We may tune this car and get rid of this air pump. We may put a cob on it, an access port, and get rid of this air pump and get a little bit extra horsepower out of it with a good tune. I am going to remove the air pump now because I'm just already tired of looking at it. I hate air pumps. So there's one more bolt right here, 10 millimeter. a good idea to make a mental note of what the bolt looks like and where it goes when you're taking it apart. It's just a good thing to get in the habit of doing. Yeah, if you have a decent enough memory to remember where they go. Okay. Now there's an air line with a pinch clamp that we're gonna remove right here. I pinched it and it released real nice. Okay. And then there's a little clamp right here that holds this bracket on. That's just got to pry that little detent back with a screwdriver to get it to release. And pry it upward. Like that. Okay. Then there's just an electrical connector to it right here. Just unplug that. Air pump is removed. Not real hard to, and these things fail. There's pretty high failure rate on these, and they're expensive. So the next thing I'm going to remove is the recovery tank for the turbocharger. It's actually a coolant tank. It's a reservoir and a recovery tank for the turbocharger. There's like four lines on it. 2 go to the radiator. Actually, let me grab a pan. Put a drain pan underneath it. Catch the coolant. So I took one off, and there's another one that goes, another coolant line that it's just a line that goes to the radiator overflow. So those 2 lines are off. Then you have one that goes, a top one that goes to the turbocharger. Actually, I'll probably remove it from the turbo itself right here. And just an FYI, these lines are these coolant lines. The 2 that go to the turbo have a very high failure rate. So it's a really good idea to replace this particular line and then the other one on the bottom side. They get brittle and break, and if you break one, there's a good chance you'll overheat your engine. If one of these breaks, you'll empty the engine out pretty fast with coolant, and you can overheat it. So if you're doing a motor swap, it's a good idea just to replace them. You know, they're like $8 a piece at the Subaru dealership. So we've taken 3 lines off. We're going to unbolt it. There's one bolt on the side. It's a 12 millimeter bolt. It's on the side of the tank here. About a 1-inch bolt. Now the tank will lift off of the bracket. There's actually 2 pins that there's rubber grommets on this tank, and they sit on these 2 pins. Down below there's another coolant line that I'm going to access with this pliers. It's just another pinch clamp. I've already moved it over. Just going to pry that off. Now be really careful with this tank. If you have a plastic tank like this in your car, these are very brittle, very prone to breakage. I'm going to drain the coolant out of it. These fittings right here break, and if you break one off, the only real repair is to replace the tank, and these are $130 for this plastic tank if you break it. So it really is important to be careful when you're taking fittings off of it. not to pry on it, because these I've broken more than one, and I've broken them being careful. Since we're draining the coolant already from the top of the engine, I'm going to go ahead and remove the upper radiator hose. If I remove the upper radiator hose, I can take the fans out and just gain more access to the front of the engine. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this upper radiator hose off if I can get at the clamps. These more pinch clamps. Sometimes getting this hose off of the water crossover tube is a little difficult because they get really corroded, because the water crossover tube's aluminum, and if the coolant isn't serviced on a regular basis, you'll get lots and lots and lots of corrosion there. And this one looks pretty good. It doesn't look like it's got much corrosion at all. Usually it'll be all white. It'll be a white powdery substance where the hose actually slides onto the water crossover. And you can see it's nice and clean. So this has been serviced. This car's been, it's had the coolant changed at least once or twice probably in its life. So I'm going to pull the fans out of it next. This water crossover, it actually attaches with two of the fan bolts. I'm going to pull that off the radiator. So I've got the fans unbolted. Now I just have to unplug the connectors, and there's one connector for each fan. Can you see down there? Let me put my little light on there. Due to the age of the vehicle and the heat that it lives in, these plastic connectors get very brittle, so you got to be super careful. You got to be careful so you don't break the retention clips that hold them in. That fan will lift right out. We'll do this one. This fan, because this car is an automatic, this car has a clip on the bottom that the transmission coolant line rests in. So you have to pull that out of the clip on the bottom of the fan. Got it. Here's the second fan. This is the bracket I'm talking about. You can see where the two transmission lines rest in there. You just got to pull them towards the back of the car, and so you can lift this out. So now we have a lot of room in the front of the engine, so we can disassemble all the accessories on the front. This one has, this is the first year that they eliminated the tensioner for the air conditioning belt. What they use is a stretch to fit belt, and it's an expensive belt if you buy it at Subaru. If you buy it at Subaru with the installation tool, it's about $80-90. The belts you can buy online for $20-30, but every time you pull the AC compressor or the timing cover off, you have to replace this belt, because when the belt gets old, it loses its ability to stretch. The rubber gets hard and brittle, and you can't stretch them again. So what I'll do with this car is I'll just remove the belt, and I'll put the old style tensioner on with a longer belt. This top hole is already tapped. It's already got threads in it, so we're going to run run an 8x125 tap into the lower hole and put threads in that, so we can just put the old style tensioner on there. This is the tensioner that came on all 2008 and older models. In 2009 they just made a design change and went with the stretch to fit belt. But this tensioner, everything is designed for this tensioner to fit in there. The bracket's still the same. They have the same two holes equally spaced. So what we're going to do is we're going to mount one of these on there when we put the engine back together, and we're going to just use a longer belt. And that way when somebody comes to service the car, they don't have to fight with this belt stretch issue. So we're just going to start removing all the brackets that hold the air alternator and AC compressor and power steering in place. The first one is this is just a belt cover. Keep your fingers out of the belt. The bolt that holds the alternator on also holds this bracket on. It just lifts out. It's got a slot in it, and it's right where the main bolt for the alternator just holds it in. Just gonna loosen up the alternator, the tensioning bracket. I'm just gonna loosen the belt. Take the alternator belt off. So now we're gonna remove the alternator. There's a little plastic protector for the spade terminal on top, and it's just got a little detent on it that you just kind of push in with a screwdriver, and then it lifts up. It's just got a little lever. And if you move that back and forth too many times, the top will break off it. So just try to be gentle with it. If you're not gentle with this, you will break the plastic cover on it. I just snap it closed so it doesn't break, so it doesn't get in the way and break. And then there's a positive connection, and there's a little detent for that on the back side that you have to push in to get this the signal wire off of the alternator. Just pull it, just pulls off. You just push on this detent, and then this actually has a little pry button, so you can put a screwdriver on and pry it out. Now we're just going to take the two bolts out. On the back side of this alternator bolt, there's a nut. That's actually a nut. It comes with a bracket. It holds itself in place. I see a lot of cars that people eliminate this for some reason. They just put a regular nut back there, but the purpose of this nut is so you don't have to hold it with a wrench. It just holds itself. And I don't know why people eliminate them, but they do. But I always put them back on. It just goes on the back side of the bolt that holds the alternator in place. See that? We're going to take a small screwdriver and just pop this bracket off. There's a little detent on the back side. Just push back on it, and this bracket will lift off. And then we're going to disconnect the AC signal wire. Now this whole wiring loom can just be pushed off to the side now. Put it right over where the battery would normally sit. Just push that over there. Now the alternator will lift right out. The next thing we're going to remove is the power steering pump. There's an electrical connector to it, and it's just got a little detent on the front side. We're just going to push that in and pop it out. It just slides out. There's just a little push button detent, and then there's just 3 bolts that hold that in place now. One of the power steering bolts is on the back side of the power steering pump, and the best way to get at it is with a 12mm swivel socket. You can't get anything directly down on it, so you have to come in at an angle, and it's really easy if you have a swivel socket. I've already got the socket on the bolt. You see how that just goes in there? And we're just going to loosen the bolt up. It's usually pretty darn tight, but we've already got the bolt out. If you have the right tool for the job, it just makes it so much easier. And then there's 2 bolts on the front we're going to pull out. And the best way to access those 2 bolts is with just like a 3-inch extension and a short deep well socket. And you just got to get on the front of them and loosen them up. And there's one right underneath the pulley. It's directly underneath the pulley, almost center. And you loosen that one up. And since everybody's got an electric ratchet, it just saves time to pull them out with an electric ratchet. If you don't have an electric ratchet, you should have one, because my wife bought this for me for Christmas, and it's the best tool I have in my toolbox. Oh, so all you girls that are watching this video, I know it's a bummer, but I am married. Cut! The next thing we're going to remove is the air conditioning compressor. We're not going to cut the belt, we're just going to unbolt the AC compressor and throw the belt in the box, just in case we change our mind and decide to reuse it, although you really can't. But it's not a direct, it's not straight up and down, so we're going to put a swivel on there just to make it easier to get the bolt loose. And that one wasn't even tight. It's almost like somebody was in here and loosened all the bolts up for us. That one out. Now there's one behind the AC compressor, and I can see that I'm probably not going to be able to get that one out. This air conditioning compressor is totally different since they went to the air pump. So they have the lines go on the very back side of it. So I see that they've eliminated the room behind it to get at that bolt. So we'll take the other 2 bolts out and we'll come back to that when the intake's loose. Just taking the other bolt off the front. Another one right here. Okay. Okay, Carrie, the time has come to remove the radiator before I damage it. Sometimes I don't take the radiator out. This time I'm going to. I'm just going to disconnect the transmission lines at the firewall and lift this out of here. I'm not feeling comfortable with the radiator in there. So I'm gonna unbolt the thermostat housing from the front of the engine right here. There's just 2 bolts that hold it on. If I can get the bolt on there. Where is it? Oh, there it is. One bolt. We're just going to pop the thermostat housing off the motor and let the water run out. forward. We're going to pop the thermostat out of it too while we're here. I just pop the thermostat out. Now all the water will run out. So I'm going to take my needle nose, long needle nose, and I'm going to disconnect the two transmission lines on the side of the frame rail. Can you see that right here?
Yep.
You see that right here? Just going to take this and I'm going to sometimes these are a bugger to get off. Sometimes you can just push on them with a pry bar and it'll slide off. There we go. Lose a little transmission fluid, but not much. I'll get the other one off. They didn't put the clamp on the way I wanted them to when they built this car. Try and turn it. I don't want to film this whole grueling process, dude. Getting this clamp out of here. Oh, there we go. Got it. You just want to show the viewers that are persistent and they don't give up easy. Right, Carrie? Okay. Not used to you being so quiet, Carrie. I'm just going to take the two bolts off the bracket. In the box they go. Brackets in the box they go. Stubborn. Here's the radiator. Now that we've got the radiator extracted, we've got a lot of room up front, top of the motor. We're going to pretty much extract the intake manifold assembly. There's lots and lots of hoses and wires and stuff to this intake. So it's a little bit of a job to remove the intake. Once we have the intake manifold off the engine, you will notice that there's just an abundance of room under the hood. So, but there's a lot of stuff to disconnect. We're going to start with the fuel lines. These fuel lines require a special quick disconnect tool. It's a little plastic sleeve that opens up and it goes around the stainless steel line. You can buy these, the little kit at Harbor Freight for $6. Comes with the correct size. So what you do is you just slide this over the stainless steel line and gently feed it into the fitting. And it's really not that easy to get in there because they got all this other stuff kind of in the way. You just push on it and the line just snaps out. There's a spring inside here, or two springy plastic pieces that you're widening them up so it'll come off this lip. There's a lip that holds a line on there. So there's two of those. We're going to get this other line out of the way first. That one we're just using needle nose. Pop that clamp off. Loosen that up a little bit. Give it a tug. And then we have another one on the bottom. only the turbos have two of these quick disconnect lines. Yeah, these are just, this is just very difficult to get a tool in there. There we go. We got it. Don't give up. You can do it. That's the hardest part of the whole job right there, getting those lines off. It really is. Now we're just going to continue by disconnecting other lines, the brake booster line. We have some breather lines that go to the valve covers, and they have, some of them have clamps on, some of them don't. There's two lines that go to the, two breather lines that go to the top of the valve cover. On this particular one, the small breather line, it's just an equalizer vacuum hose. That one should slide off pretty simply, and the other one has a clamp, and I'll show you how to disconnect that. But we're going to try and pull on this one and see. We'll actually disconnect it up on top first. Let me get a screwdriver. We're going to push it off right here first. I try to anyway. I got it broke loose. Let's see if it'll slide off. Yeah, we got it off. And now we're going to try and pull it straight off the valve cover. I'm going to have to finagle it with a screwdriver. I have to pry on it a little bit to get it off. It's coming off, but it's the hose is hard as a rock, so it'll be one of those hoses that we replace. I just cracked it. All I did is bend on it a little bit, and I cracked it. So see, there's a crack in it right there. It's just hard as a rock. It's just the hose is brittle, so we're going to put a new one on there. They're $8. You know, we're going to put $100 worth of hoses on this car when we put it back together. This is one of them. So there's another line on the valve cover on this side, and that has a little clamp on it. It's a pinch clamp. It actually has a detent, and the way to disconnect it is just take a small screwdriver like this, drop it down into that slot, and just pry on it, and the clamp will release. You can see that it's released. And then we're going to try and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to try and get that hose off of there too. If these hoses have never been replaced, they're a challenge. I'm going to try and remove it from the back side, the other end. There's another clamp just like that had on the valve cover. There's another pinch, one of those pinch clamps. So I'm going to release it like I just did, and I'm going to try and pull it off the back side here because it's not coming off the valve cover. And it did come off. It seems like the heat from the aluminum of the valve cover hardens up these hoses, because on the rest of the intake manifold usually the hoses come off. They just don't come off like the valve covers. So it's just got to be the heat travel through the aluminum that just really heats that rubber up and dries it out. So I got it off on the other end. Now I'm probably just going to crack it and break it to get it off. There is another option that you can choose to do this. You can heat them up with a heat gun or a hair dryer. And then you can try to reuse them, but I just replace them. I just don't want to take the time and put a bad hose back on. So again, it cracked. It's cracking it. That's okay. We're not gonna. We'll replace it. This is the line that goes from the intake to the blow-off valve. I'm just gonna toss that in there. Now we're going to disconnect the air pump. There's an electronic valve that opens and closes the air supply from the air pump, and that's mounted on the back side of the cylinder head on this particular model. In fact, it's on all 08 newer cars. They all have air pumps, 07s, some 07s, 08, 09, and newer. So there's an air pump on the back side of here that we're gonna disconnect it and try and get it out of the way here. It just it adds extra work to this motor removal, but it's a necessary evil. You have to take it off. So let's see if we get a socket on here. There's a bolt. There's a vent tube that goes from the air pump alongside the cylinder head, and we just unbolted that from the valve cover. There's a short bolt that holds that to the valve cover. And so we're going to remove this tube. And it's really not easy to get to, the bottom side of it. It's got a pinch clamp on it. We're going to try and get this valve out of the way first, this air control valve. It's got a wire on the back side. I just unplugged it. And there's two bolts on the side of it, two 10mm nuts. Okay. Very tight. Hard to get to also. One more. And they're both in really dark places. That nut hit the ground. It's a good thing. We really need to pull this hose off of there. You can't really. I think we'll have to lift up the car to get at it. Okay. Well, I'm going to move on. I'm going to just keep disconnecting stuff on here, all the electrical connections. You know, there's a crank sensor wire. There's an oil pressure sensor wire. This is your coolant sensor wire. We're just going to unplug everything. Go back to that air pump after we get everything else disconnected. I'm going to get the battery cable out of the way. It's just, this air pump really makes this a tough R&R. I just disconnected the ground strap from the battery to the block. It attaches right at the starter. So I got that one. Now I'm gonna unbolt the starter wire, positive starter wire, and then get this harness out of my way. Okay, so I got that harness out of the way now. Push it off to the side. Now I can get back here, get that valve out. Gotta find the nuts for it. If I can even get it in there. Can't even get my socket on. I got a 1/4 inch dry socket on that nut, the one I was struggling with. So I'm gonna take it out with my air ratchet. So the valve came off now. Woo, doggy, that was a bugger. This is just a emissions air valve, and there's the detent. I couldn't access it. I couldn't get it and push on it hard enough to get this valve to pull off. This bolts onto the back of the cylinder head. Actually, this is the TGV, I'm sorry. This could have stayed right on the intake. I didn't have to take this off. That's okay. So I cannot access the back AC bolt simply because the intake manifold doesn't allow access. There's just not enough room between the intake and the AC compressor. So I'm going to take the 3 bolts that bolt the AC compressor to the main bracket. I'm going to take those 3 out and see if I can get the AC compressor moved out of the way. So we're going to do that quick. It's a 12mm socket. There's 3 of those bolts that hold that in. See if we can get the AC compressor out of the way and get the belt off. Very tight. Very tight. That bolt didn't actually come out all the way. Okay. I did not end up removing this bolt all the way. I couldn't get a wrench on it. So this AC compressor is still, because of the belt, still doesn't want to give way. It's because I can't get the bolt out because it hits the timing cover. So that doesn't really do me any good. Okay, we'll leave the AC compressor where it's at. Let's look over here, see what we got. You wanna maybe come over here, Carrie, and take a peek? I'm just gonna start unplugging the electrical connectors over here. Some of these have little wire looms that you have to, little pinch connectors that you have to disconnect. And they're not always easy to get them opened up. This one's really a bugger. There, we got it open. Unplug it. This is an O2 sensor connector. There we go. All these little wire loom things that are a pain in the ass to disconnect. They're hard to open up. Okay. We have coil wires down here that have to be unplugged from the coils. These little there's little connectors that snap into the valve cover that have to be pulled out. It kind of surprises me that they're still intact, because if the car's ever had spark plugs put in it, these connectors are usually broken. But it came out, pulled out. Now there's a little detent on the coil wire that you have to push in on. I don't know if you can even see it, but you push on the front of it. There's a little button, these do not like to come off. They break all the time. Getting these coil wires off is very difficult. Push on the front side and pull forward. They're very brittle. And they don't like to come off easy. That one's going to be a bugger. Let's try the back one. See if the back one. Oop, see, it broke. I broke the detent that holds it in place. It just broke right off. Super common, just because of the heat. As soon as you push on them, they break. That one came off. I got this one to release. They make these connectors, the plastic parts. You can de-pin them and replace the plastic part. See how the piece is broken out of this one? It's missing this piece right here. Just really brittle from age. But they have to be unplugged. You have no choice. So on this side we also have two hoses. You can see these here. We're going to take those both off of the valve cover. The back one, I'm going to release the clamp like that. I'm going to get a screwdriver and pry those off. Never come off easy. Which one am I on? This car was born and raised in Phoenix. I shouldn't say it was born here, but it's been raised here. It's been here its whole life. So everything on this car is brittle. So I'm going to use a heat gun. I cannot get these off. I'm going to use the heat gun and heat these hoses up so they'll slide off. It's just too hard to get them off without heating them up. As soon as it gets warm enough, I'll tug on it, it'll come right off. See, just pulled right off. A little bit of heat. Do the back one same way. Clamps in my way. It's hot. Clamps very hot. Get it good and hot, and then I'm going to pry it off. The hose doesn't have much give to it. It's just, so I'm going to have to get underneath it and pull. There, came off. So you can see how good a heat gun does assist you in getting, you know, really hard stiff hoses off. I'm going to just pull these off the intake manifold. The other side, like I say, is still pliable because it hasn't been connected to an aluminum, you know, engine component. So this other hose also has one of those snap clamps, so you have to declip. You have to unclip it. You see where I'm at? See it? I just released it. See if it'll slide off without. Yeah, this one's going to slide right off. Okay. So I got that hose. Okay, I actually got this hose off without breaking it, but it's still hard as a rock down here. Putting it back on would be difficult. You'd have to heat it up to get it back, put it back on. I'll just replace it with a new one. We've got a solenoid right here for the variable cam timing. It's kind of a bugger to get to. I'm going to get a screwdriver to push down on the detent. Can you see this right here, Gary? There's a variable cam solenoid. Got that one to come off without breaking it. And then there's a, if you look down underneath here, this is your camshaft position sensor. There's one on each head on the back side of the head. The detent is on the back side of it to try and get it unlatched. So I'm going to try and see if that one comes off fairly decent. It's got to come off one way or the other. Got it. That's some of the hardest parts on this engine removal is getting the clips to detach off of electrical, you know, the electrical sensors and stuff. It's just hard to get them to release. So we have those released. So and since those parts stay on the engine and the connectors come off with the intake, they have to be taken off. Okay, so on the back side here, we have a couple, this air pump, because it has an air pump, it has a couple more electrical connectors. Take this bracket off in here. Now this is the first time I've pulled an engine out with the air pump. I've done other work on them, but never pulled the engine out. So these are things I have not encountered because this is a change that they made when they put the air pumps on. I'm trying to get this to release. I don't know if I'm going to be able to. This electrical connector actually slides off forward, but you have to release it. And there's a release down underneath here that you can't see. So what I'm having a problem with is getting this this fitting on this elbow to release. Trying to get, I mean, this is all snap together stuff. When they build these cars, it's easier to put them together than it is to take them apart because everything just snaps together, and then you have to figure out how to unsnap it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this whole elbow off. I'm going to pry the fittings out, and then I'm going to turn this upside down and see how that releases. So what I'm doing right now is prying this little elbow off the intake. This is just a vacuum fitting that goes into the back of the intake. So I took the clamp off and I'm going to pry that out. So I just released it. And now I have I now have another elbow that goes down into the block. And I'm going to try and pop that elbow out. If I break it, I bought it. Oh, it's my car, so I already bought it anyway. So I'm going to see, I'm prying the elbow out now. Did you see how I did that, Carrie? Mm-hmm. So now this whole piece is loose. Now I can look in there and say, oh my God, how does that release? And I think you just stick a screwdriver in there to release it. It looks like you just stick a skinny little screwdriver in there. But I still can't seem to. Look how easy it is when you get the right angle. Yeah. But I was having a problem is getting this plastic fitting to unsnap off of here.
Don't shine that light in the camera, please.
Oh. So we got it off. It's done. Didn't break anything. That's a good thing. Just another change they made in these later years that makes it a little bit more difficult. They didn't have all this in the earlier models. Pile's getting bigger, right? So we have to disconnect the knock sensor while we're back here. That's usually just a pinch and pull. Yeah, it's just a pinch and pull, but all this plastic stuff is so hard. But it came. It's just it just doesn't pinch as easy as it used to when it was a little bit newer. So there should be a couple water lines. There are 2 water lines back here we have to disconnect. Here's one of them. There's always 2. No matter what model, you always have two water lines. There's one right here and one right here. So we're going to disconnect those quick. And then one right here. Yep. So we got the 2 water lines off. Okay, so the other thing we have to disconnect while we're over here, on this side, we've got just about everything disconnected. There is a bracket on the back side of the coil on this side. We have to unbolt this bracket right here off the coil because that holds this harness for the O2 sensor. So we're going to get a 12 millimeter on a 1/4 inch ratchet. So see that, Gary? Got that on there. See, it's the bolt that holds the coil on. And once we get it loose enough, that bracket will slide out. It's slotted. So the bracket's got a slot on it. See there's a slot. So all you have to do is loosen that bolt up 3 or 4 turns, and then you can slide this bracket right out from underneath the head of the bolt. So this is going to stay with the car. This isn't going to come out with the intake. This is actually attached to the exhaust manifold. So what we're trying to do right now is get everything disconnected from the intake manifold to the engine. So there's 2 things left on here. You have the line that the turbo. There's a vacuum line that goes to the turbo T, and that has to be unplugged. And if you want to look back here, Carrie, I'll show you what there's a little T right here. You see the T right there? Mm-hmm. So this line has to be unplugged off of the turbo T. Again, everything's hard as a rock. This hose that I'm trying to pry off is it's just hard. It's really hard. It'll need to be replaced. So we have that done, and now the next thing we have to do is take a 10 millimeter bolt or a 10 millimeter socket and unbolt the air intake tube. This is the air intake tube, goes underneath the intake, and it bolts right to the turbo. And can you see the nut right here, Carrie? At the end of my screwdriver. There's a hose there's a clamp right there. It's right at the tip of my screwdriver. That clamp has to get loosened up. So we're going to do that next. So I got my little 1/4 inch ratchet. I'm going to try and squeeze that in there to that. I'm sure I loosened it up plenty. I spun it and spun it. So, okay, so as of right now, the only wire I really have to release again, or now, is the main ECU harness right here, and then I got to go back on that side and I have to release the plug for the camshaft sensor on that side. I just can't see it, so I'm going to have to get to it somehow. But let me get this main harness unplugged. This is just you just kind of got to pry this. You have to pry this back, and it's a little bit of a lever. There, you just pry that back. There's a catch on it, and then you just pull this back, and the harness separates. It unplugs like that. Okay. Once that's separated, now we have to release this from the bracket that it's bolted to. There we go. There's a little release right here you have to pry up on to get it to slide off. We're back to this side, and I think the only thing we have left to disconnect over here is this one sensor. 2 sensors actually. We have the solenoid, the variable cam solenoid has to be released. right here. Okay. That's one. And then there's another sensor on top of the cylinder head that you cannot see. It's one of those, you can only do it from feel. But you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this the oil filler cap off so I can get my hand in there better. I'm going to pop this off quick. Okay, so let me pull this off. It's the oil filler cap, oil filler tube. Let me see if I can get my hand in here now and get this last sensor unplugged. Got it. That's okay. That's one of those sensors. That's one of those sensors that you can't see. So what ends up happening quite often is it won't get disconnected. Somebody won't see it, they won't disconnect it. So they'll lift the intake manifold off and they'll pull the plug right off the harness. You can't buy those plugs from Subaru. You have to get a used one off a harness. So if you do happen to lift the intake off and break an electrical connection, you're gonna have to find a used one off a junk car. Those pieces and parts like that are made of unobtainium. You just can't get that stuff. So the one last thing on this side is I have to get the coil wires unplugged. And if you remember, when I showed you on the other side, I broke one of the connectors. So I'm going to reach down in here and see if I can get them to disconnect without breaking them. I'm going to try a screwdriver to get them to release. You should be able to do it with your finger, but yeah, they're not. There, it released. Just a little more pressure. These coil wires are a bummer. So, oh, that one broke. So we got two broken ones. In a perfect world, we'd have everything disconnected. I know it's a lot to remember. You might have to watch this video 10 times to remember all the connections, but there's a lot of stuff to disconnect here. So we're going to lift the intake off the engine, and we're going to be real careful, and we're going to look and make sure that we have everything disconnected before we tug on it, because if you tug on it, you break something. So we're going to take the 8 bolts out. They're 12 millimeters, and they're all pretty easy to see. They're right up on top. Very tight. Wow. That one doesn't want to come loose. Okay, we're gonna have to use it. Very tight. Wow. Sound like the earth moved when I crack loose. I'll loosen up the last one back here too. Pull those out. Long bolts. Back one is hard to get out because there's too much stuff in the way. Stuff that's not very pliable. All 4 of them. see what happens over here. Another tight one. Wow. Gonna get a magnet. Magnet. Come all out. Well, I think we have everything disconnected, but we're ready to lift the intake off, and we're gonna find out. We're gonna we have to pull the intake forward a little bit to get it out of to get the intake. If you want to look over here, Carrie, we're out of the turbo. The air intake hose came out of the turbo. You can see the shiny silver part of the turbo. That's where the intake goes on. So we're all disconnected there. What I'm going to do is lift the intake back and up and see if we have everything else disconnected. Seems the air conditioning is going to maybe be a problem, unless there's something else connected here. I can't tell. This side looks good over here. I think everything's off there. But I'm having a problem over here with this AC hose. So I'm going to unbolt the rest of the AC right here now, quick, since I can access it. Take this last bolt out in the back. Okay. Now I can actually get the belt off of it. And I can move it out of the way. Okay. So now I should be able to lift this right out. Wow. We got everything. Crazy. Oh my gosh. I am going to pull the water crossover off of it right now, and I'm going to attempt to get the rest of this air pump stuff out of the way. But realistically, we're well over halfway. Let's check the turbo. Turbo feels pretty good. Almost no side shaft play at all. Probably been changed out once, I would think. But, okay, so let's take this water crossover off. This water crossover actually has the air pump, the passenger side air pump solenoid attached to it. So we're going to take that off first. Which really looks like it's going to be a pain. A pain. You really can't. Wow. Try taking these two. So I've taken the water crossover bolts out on this side, and I got 2 over here. So it looks like that solenoid has to lift out with the water crossover tube. But there are 2 bolts holding it on over here. This whole air system on this thing just totally complicates this whole install. It looks like we're going to have to unbolt the turbo in order to pull the water crossover tube off, which is not the normal, that's not the normal way we would do it. But it looks like the turbo's got to come off so I can unbolt the solenoid right here. There's a bolt on the bottom and one on the top. You can't get it though without removing the turbo. So we're going to take the turbocharger off next. So it's going to be a little bit before we can get this off. So let's get that turbo unbolted. We're going to bolt the oil supply line first. Then we have a water coolant line, which is right at the top here. I'm going to take that off. Okay, here it comes. Okay, get that off. Okay, so I gotta pull a heat shield off of it. And there's a lot of bolts that hold this on. I think there's like 8 or 9. 8 or 9 of these little bolts that hold that heat shield on. Oops. So Carrie, if you're trying to think about what to get me for Christmas this year, one of those air ratchets and 1/4-inch drive. Yeah. One of these electric ratchets. They make the same one in 1/4-inch drive. That's what I want for Christmas.
Say it again.
I want one of these in 1/4-inch drive for Christmas.
All right. Well, if you're a good boy, maybe Santa will bring that to you. I know you've got enough coal.
Coal? Coal? What are you talking about, kid?
You're making America great again.
I tell you what, I'm wearing a t-shirt, I'm sitting here sweating. What are we having? What's the high today? 80, 81?
You know you live in a desert, right?
Too hot to be wearing real clothes. So we have most of them out, but there's something hiding somewhere. Oh, there's something on the side here. Yeah, there's a lot of bolts that hold this heat shield on. Is that it? They definitely don't want that to fall off and end up in the road, do they? There. Wow. Lots of bolts holding the head on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bolts. Well, we're going to start unbolting the turbo now. We cannot completely remove the turbo yet, simply because we have to take this downpipe off. So we're going to have to get underneath the car to unbolt the downpipe. While we're underneath the car, we'll take the exhaust off of it too. We'll take the exhaust pipe and the up pipe off. So what I'm going to do is just remove the bolts I can get at right now. That hold the turbo in place. bolts and nuts, because there's some of these have nuts on them. And some of them are very tight. I have to get my Harbor Freight breaker bar out. Very tight. Oops. So I just unbolt. There's a bracket that attaches the turbo to the cylinder head. I just took that bracket off. That also has one bolt hole for the turbo, the turbo heat shield bolts onto this too. Another tight one. I'm gonna have to get out my air impact. So we took the bolts off that we can take off there. We have to take the downpipe bolts off. We can actually remove every downpipe bolt off from up above here. So that's the next thing we're going to do. So to remove the downpipe, you need a fairly good a long ratchet with some leverage, because these bolts are usually pretty tight because they've been exposed to a lot of heat, so they usually are very tight, and sometimes they'll even gall up and won't come apart at all. The last turbo that I pulled off of a car, one of the nuts that holds the downpipe on galled up, and we had to torch it off. It was a real pain in the butt. The heat just can have real adverse effects on these fasteners. So now we have 3 nuts to take off. Oh, that one came off nice. So far, so good. Get a longer socket. Yeah, this last nut is not coming off. It's always the last one, just FYI. It's always the very last one that gives you the most crap. Let's try something different. Let's try a box it wrench on it. Break it loose. It's just a bad angle. There. Let's try this. There's a guide. Okay. That's it. I don't think we can pry that. I don't think we can pry that back far enough. There's one bolt underneath here, but I don't think that there's not enough. Yeah, this is too solidly mounted. There's a bolt that holds that right to the block. So now we got to get underneath the car. Finally. Been looking forward to this all day. Do not try this at home. Okay, I'm supporting it on the sway bar brackets. Okay, you want me to describe what I'm doing here?
Yeah.
Taking the there's a bolt. There's a bolt that holds a catalytic converter to the side of the transmission, and I'm going to take that bolt out. It's right in front of the drive axle. So that attaches the catalytic converter to the transmission. Instead of them using a hanger on the exhaust, they use a mount on the side of the cat. Now I'm unbolting the catalytic converter from the mid-pipe. There is a hanger on the very back of the transmission that supports the exhaust back there. And you just have to manipulate that out of the way. And the exhaust will just hang right there. And then you just pull. Oh, shoot. There is another little bolt that holds the heat shield to this downpipe, which I have to get from up above. Oh, that's just dandy. Stupid bolt. Stupid bolt. Stupid bolt. One catalytic converter removed. No rust. It's party. And this bolt holds the turbo to the downpipe. Or the uppipe, I'm sorry, the uppipe. And it's tight. It's another tight one. So the turbo's all disconnected. The only thing that's still connected from the turbo to the engine is the drain tube that goes into the bottom of the cylinder head. It's a 5/8 6-inch piece of hose, and it's just held on with a pinch clamp. We should be able to pry the intake right up off of it. The turbo. We should be able to take the turbo and just pry it up, and it just, that's where the drain tube goes to. The hose is still on the motor, but it just pries up, and there's the turbocharger. So that's all you have to do to change the turbo. Is what we did today.
Just that.
That's it. Yeah, you can do it in like 20 minutes if you're really good.
Yeah, and you have like 4 people and all the right tools.
You can actually change the turbocharger without removing the intake. Most people do it that way. Putting a turbo on one of these cars is not simple. It's not really a simple job, but you know, it could be done either way. Take the intake off, or it's just getting the air intake hose hooked, you know, lined up with the turbo without tearing it, without wrecking it. That's the hard part. So yeah, at this point in time, we got a couple more bolts that we can take off up here that hold the up pipe in place. Yeah, another tight one. Very tight. Another very tight one. So we're going to get underneath the car, there's still a diaper on the bottom of this car. It's got the under engine plastic cover. We're going to remove that, and we're going to drop the Y pipe out of the car, the actual exhaust. That's really the next step. I want to get that done so I can lower the car, so I can reach the bell bolts and stuff, and to get the starter out of it. Really what's left is just bell bolts, torque converter bolts, and exhaust, and a starter. So, but I want to get the car back down on the ground, so I'm going to drop that diaper off of it. Doja. So this one is just 3 bolts and then 2 clips. 3 shoulder bolts. They have a shoulder on them. And there's 2 push pins, one in each wheel well. There's a push pin in each wheel well that look like this. Very nice push pin. They usually break. These didn't. These came out very nicely. They never usually do that. They almost always break. These came out nice. They've been changed, I'm sure. Somebody put new ones in at some point. There's the underbody armor right here. Keeps the whole car together. You put that on there so all the oil runs in there so it doesn't drip on the ground. There's a ground strap on the bottom of each cylinder head. It's just a little 10 millimeter. It's actually a 6 millimeter bolt with a 10 millimeter head. 6 millimeter bolt, 10 millimeter head. There's a ground strap on the bottom of each cylinder head, and this is the bolt that holds them on. Those have to come off, or you'll break them when you pull the motor. One on each head. a heat shield. There's a heat shield that unbolts for the exhaust. This is the driver's side, it's 2 pieces. And on the passenger side, it's 2 pieces, but you're only taking 1 piece off. And in Subaru's infinite wisdom, which pisses me off, you have to take the O2 sensor off to get one of them out, or pull it through the bracket. The O2 sensor wire goes through this hole. Before I put this on, I will take my die grinder and I will cut this, so I can put this on once with the O2 sensor in place. I have 2 bolts under here, Carrie, that hold the up pipe on the Y pipe. In order to get at one of those bolts, I have to remove the O2 sensor.
What is that?
O2 sensor socket. It's got a split in it so you can put it around the wire. 6-point. And we're going to try and loosen up the O2 sensor. This car has no rust on it at all because it's lived here its whole life. So it's probably going to come loose pretty simple. O2 sensor. Came off very nice. Now we're going to unbolt the rest of the exhaust. So we're taking 2 bolts off. We're taking 2 bolts off that hold the up pipe onto the Y pipe. You want to take a peek under here and see if you can see this, Carrie? Can you see this right here?
Yep.
So there's 2 bolts, one on top, one on bottom, and those hold the up pipe to the Y pipe. And there's a gasket in there. So now you could literally lift the up pipe out of the car, but we're not going to go up there and do that. We're going to drop the Y pipe out of it. So that's just like every other Y pipe. It's just got six nuts holding it onto the motor. So I'm going to take all 6 exhaust nuts off right now. Jackpot. Hit the jackpot again. That could have been dangerous. It's heavy. It's cast iron. We have 2 motor mount nuts now that have to come off. And really, that should be everything we have left underneath the car to do, is just take those off. I'll pop those off quick. Pop them off. Could drain the oil if it wanted. Should we see if there's any oil in it?
Sure call.
See if the last guy left any oil in it. Let's just do it. Let's do it. I hate pulling the engine out with having oil all over the place, so we'll just drain it quick. Oops. Oops. Well, it looks like somebody put oil in it to see if it would repair a rod knock. Guess it didn't though. This thing was pretty loud. It would run. It would run, but it sounded like something wanted to fly out the engine compartment.
It was possessed.
It was. Carrie, I'm going to lift this up pipe out if you want to see. Can you see?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's the up pipe. The up pipe connects the turbo. The turbo sits right on top of here. This is the Y pipe off the engine. The up pipe actually bolts to the Y pipe right here. You can see that. You can see the flange right there here.
Yeah.
So this bolts right there. The exhaust, all the exhaust comes up through this pipe. All the exhaust from the engine comes up through this pipe, and this is what feeds the turbo with exhaust right here. The turbo sits directly on top of here, and that charges the turbo. Okay, we're going to screw the drain plug back in it and let the car down. We're just going to snug it up a little bit so it doesn't drip all over the ground. I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to mop this up a little bit, Carrie. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Back down to earth. Down to earth here. Remove the dog bone nut. See the dog bone nut? Washer fell on the ground. Gonna loosen the dog bone over here. We're gonna raise it up out of the way. We're gonna lift it up and then snug it back up again. Okay. There's a bracket here that holds the turbo in place. This bracket holds the up pipe. There's a bolt on the side of the block. We're going to take that bolt out. If I can find it. There it is. There we go. Here we go. This just supports the turbocharger and the up pipe. Now we're going to take this valve right here. I'm going to take this valve apart. These are the nuts I had to take the turbo off to actually access these two bolts, or they're nuts actually. Yeah, what a pain. That's all I got to say. I don't like these. I don't like this at all. I don't like this air pump thing. That's just an elbow to go from the back of the cylinder head up to the air pump valve air pump control valve. just all about emissions, this air pump thing. Reducing CO2 output. Pumps extra oxygen into the exhaust system to make it burn cleaner. It's a whole reason behind it, Carrie. So the other thing, we have another air hose here that's always brittle. This one right here. This actually is a breather system. It goes right into the top of the crankcase on the block, and that has to. We're gonna have to break it. It's gonna break. It's hard as a rock. It's gonna break. I'll show you, bro. You can watch it break. That's a little water hose right there. That's gonna break. Watch. You just watch. Hear it break? Hose broke. See? Right there. Hard as a rock. That's a water crossover tube. This feeds the turbo. And these are both breather lines. These are both breathers. Just goes from one valve cover across to the other valve cover. That's all this hose does. And it sucks, the crankcase sucks the ventilation from the valve covers into the engine. It's a kind of a crankcase ventilation system. And the other two hoses are water. This hose is water.
It's a cranky ventilation system.
It's cranky ventilation.
And then your broken hose.
Do you see that hose? How it just
Where is it?
It just busted right here.
How come I can't see it? Oh, there it is.
It just broke. Yeah, it's just brittle, hard as a rock.
How you gonna get that off?
Oh, I'm good at that, Jerry. Now we got a couple heater hoses right here. The heater hose. Sometimes they're a bugger to get off. Oops. Come on. Bugger to get off. So one thing I forgot to do when I was underneath there was disconnect this. I'm gonna try and do that from up here now that I got access to it. I'm gonna get this other heater hose off of here first, if I can get at it. This clamp's in a stupid spot. Clamps have a very limited life expectancy. This one's the last. This is the last car it's ever gonna see. It's going away. These clamps are bad. They're evil. These spring clamps are evil. And the funny thing is, they only work good once. If you try to reuse them, they leak every time.
sure it makes the assembly line more efficient.
It does. It's all about the ease of putting it together. Funny is that the early style ones, all these hoses slide right off. These later ones, it's a fight. It's a fight to get those off.
The later hosens?
The later hosens. It's a leader hose. Use leverage. Gotta use leverage. There, pee on the ground, see if I care.
Well, that wasn't the car, that's me.
Oh. If it me, it sounded like a fire hose. That was just a trickle carry.
I want to get that prostate checked.
Yeah, this won't even come off. This has to come out with the car, the engine, this hose. This won't even come off of here. The studs are too long. Okay, we get that out of the way to get the torque. And this right here, this will break off too. It's hard as a rock. Hard as a rock. Watch.
Wow.
That's a rubber hose. That's a rubber hose. Just breaks. They're just brittle. Hard as a rock. Can't reuse them. No siree. People do. They just crack it and put a clamp on it. Maybe wrap some electrical tape around it. You'd be surprised what people do to save $6. It's amazing. It really is truly amazing. So I just popped off the access port for the access hole for the torque converter bolts. So I'm going to spin the motor over and take those out. It's one. Can you count to 4, Carrie?
1, 7, wait.
1, 3, 6, 8, 2. Engine turns over though. That's a good thing. How many was that, Carrie?
3.
3. What happens when you hit 4?
You hit the golf ball?
Oh, just the box. Okay. Starter and bell bolts, and we're ready to pull it out there, Big Daddy. Starter and bell bolts. Starter and bell bolts. Let's do it. There's 3 bolts on this side, and there's a stud on the bottom, and there's my screwdriver I lost before. So we're just going to loosen them up with this long ratchet. They're tight. They're very tight. They're always very tight. Very tight.
Well, I wouldn't want my engine falling off.
Very tight. You know what? I gotta get a cheetah bar. Cheetah bar. I have to use this here at the shop because my wife doesn't like me cheating at home. When I told my wife I had a cheater bar, she thought that I had a drinking establishment where I went to cheat. Very tight. See how tight that is? Very tight. Got them all loose. And the washer. And the washer. Okay, we're getting there, Carrie. Okay, that also makes it more difficult. This limited room here. That sucks. I hate that air pump. I hate it already. I'm not loving it. Not liking it. Pinch off and remove this signal starter wire. Cut that off. Now I got 2 bolts to hold the starter on. See if those are tight. Gosh darn it. Tight, very tight. Longer wrench.
Was that the bolt or your neck?
That was both. See how tight that is, man? Oh, even the washer's on there. I'm starting to think this engine's never been out. Starting to think that. Everything is where it should be. And that's not normal. So far every nut and bolt was in. Everything was just the way it was when it was built. You want one of these, don't you?
That is pretty cool.
One starter. One starter. Little thing, ain't it?
Yeah.
Bend it. Hear that? Snap my nut. My thumb. Okay. 2 more bolts, Carrie. 2 more bolts. 1 more bolt and 1 more nut. You know how hard it is to turn a bolt when it's that far down with a ratchet? And a bolt that's loose but just wants to go back and forth? That
How hard is it?
That electric ratchet is a lifesaver. It's a lifesaver. You know how mad I'd be at my wife if I had to work hard at every bolt I took out? I'd go home so crabby. So, no matter how you look at it, that's a lifesaver. Hey Carrie, where's the nut on the bottom? Let's see it. Where is it? Okay, did you remember how tight the other one was?
I just hope you bought it dinner first.
Bought it dinner.
I mean, you got your hands in there deep.
This is gonna... I don't think this is gonna be good, Carrie. I don't think this is... I always save the hardest one for last, you know that? Oops, sorry.
That's right.
That's hard. Ah. Isn't that crazy how tight that is?
How many foot-pounds would you say that was?
To get that off?
Yeah.
100, 120, 100, 120. But it's just the angle, you know. If you were standing with it right in front of you, it'd be no big deal. Let's give it another go. Try a different socket on it. The crazy thing about it, Carrie, is that I had to turn it a whole revolution before it loosened. That's the really crazy part. Bad nut! Really isn't even stripped. Didn't strip at all. It was just fighting. Bad nut. Join your friends, bad luck. What do I have here, Carrie? Look at this one. This one looks perfect. How's that? Oh, look at this. I got an idea. Watch this. Where can I hook that to, Carrie? Oh, right there. Look at that. Oh, you're the master. Oh, shit. I forgot about that one slight detail. Okay, hold that there. I have a solution to that. Let's go. Look at that. What in the f*** did those idiots do? I loaned this to the guys next door, and look where they put the pins.
Well, at least you got the pins back.
Yeah, they're supposed to be right here. They're supposed to be right there to keep this from falling to the ground.
Well, they didn't know that, did they?
Well, they took them out of there when they borrowed it.
Well, maybe this person who took them out isn't the same guy who put them back in.
Well, douchebag.
That's what happens when you loan stuff out to people.
I need to borrow your pressure washer. I'm like, what do I fucking look like, a tool rental place? What the f***? I'm gonna put a sign out, Mike's Tool Rental. That way at least they know they're gonna have to pay for the shit when they borrow it, right? Tool rental available. Minimum charge $50. That's what it's gonna say. So my wife's son-in-law bought the new FRS, which I don't even know. It's got a different. It's not called an FRS since Scion is no longer, but it's the same as an FRS. He bought a 2018
BRZ.
No, it's FR. It's
Still an FR. So we didn't buy the
it's
Subaru.
Toyota. It's the Toyota version, not the Scion.
Not the Subaru version.
Well, you know, it's similar.
Well, Toyota originally named that car the FT86.
Well, it's something like that now. The Toyota version is something like that.
Yeah.
But now he wants me to build it so he can get about 450 horsepower.
Don't you normally use the breaker bar to separate the engine from the transmission before you do
Not
that?
yet. No, not quite yet. That's going to happen in a moment. I'm going to take the weight off it first, and then I'm going to do it. But yeah, now he says this thing's a dog. I need 450 horsepower out of it. And I said, well, trade it in on a
Mustang.
No, on a STI, and then we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
That, or you're just gonna have to get pulled around by a new Corvette.
Or a Mustang.
Or Mustang. Or Mustang. Okay. Did we take all the bolts out, Carrie?
I didn't take a single one
You
out.
didn't take any out?
Nope.
Did you double check to make sure they're all out?
Nope.
You didn't double? Well, I thought you were the cameraman.
I am. And the cameraman can.
Cameraman can, 'cause he mixes it with love.
That's a different kind of cameraman.
The trick to this is leaving the torque converter. in the transmission. Boom! Hey, took me 5 hours. If I was rushing it, I'd have this out of here by now.
If you were Russian,
If I was Russian, I would have had this out of here a long time ago.
but European.
One bad turbo engine.
Can I just take that to the auto parts store and tell them I need one of those?
Sure. Yep. That's what you'll do. That's what you would do. This is such a stupid thing.
Yeah, looks like you left the torque converter in there.
It's,
I didn't see you take that off.
look at that stupid hunk of stuff.
What is that?
This is the air. These are the air valves.
Oh,
They control the amount of air going into the exhaust system from the air pump. The air pump connects right here, and it blows air in through this hose, and these control air going into the exhaust system. Through these. Well, this is a fitting over here, and then there's one that bolts right here, and it pumps air into the exhaust on the back side of the cylinder head. This port goes right into the exhaust port. It's blowing air into there. You know how when you feed air onto into a fire, like in a house fire, you open a door, allow air in, and you get this big rush. Well, that's exactly what this does. This injects air into the exhaust system. That hot air that's being burned by the engine, that hot air gets an infusion of oxygen, and it makes it burn much hotter. And that it burns all the unburned, fuel that's being expelled by the engine. That's the purpose of the air pump, just to oxygenate the exhaust gases and make them burn hotter. So, but it's counterproductive if you're on the servicing end of it. It sucks. What we just accomplished was pulling the engine out of a 2009 Subaru Forester XT with a 2.5 liter turbo engine. We got the engine out. We're gonna rebuild it. It's got to be stripped down and disassembled, and lots of new parts. So about a week or so, we'll be able to put it right back in.